I was shocked to discover this a number of years ago, that the mink range extends all throughout the southeastern United States. I mean, I grew up in Connecticut and had seen them running around. But after coming down to Virginia, I thought, well, mink don't come down that far. They don't move down here. But I was wrong. They have traditionally been down here. And in fact, they are occasionally sighted or caught. I know at least along the James River, because up where I live, because I've investigated. Next. Bird species were one of the other groups that were recognized in the Great Lakes as being very sensitive, because we had tern populations, gull populations, cormorants, and bald eagles that were all suffering. And this started back in the 70s when we thought, well, it's pesticides. And part of the problem is that they were exposed to all of those things, as many of us were and some still are. And they've had a variety of problems. Next, please. Gulls have had the population have a problem of putting two sets of eggs in the same nest, two females nesting together, no males, so that they're not getting fertilized. And normally that happens in populations at a very, very low level, but observable, you know, less than 1% of the population. In the Great Lakes, they were measuring 10%. Ooh. And it was all associated with these contaminated chemicals. And PCBs turned out to be one of the major contaminants for those animals. Next. Bald eagles have had a couple of different problems, not only reproductive problems, but bald eagles developed a strange beak abnormality, and I don't have a picture of that here. Eagles and cormorants developed a beak abnormality where the beak did not meet, a crossed beak syndrome. And of course, in its mild form, it just misses, but it's in extreme form, it's very pronounced. And the top beak is way crossed over the bottom beak. And obviously you can't grab anything like that. And so they would gradually and slowly starve to death, being only able to capture small prey. Terns were having some of the same problems. Next. Fish had population declines, and we had a series of developmental abnormalities in fish, and then I'm going to show you a picture of a really bizarre thing that happens with fish with the dioxin-like compounds, and of which PCBs were a large part. Next. And then, of course, we have native populations of bivalves that were suffering. Thanks to the researchers at North Carolina State University, just up the road here, we have some research here in North Carolina on our site with caged animals and with laboratory-held animals using water from Briar Creek, from Crabtree, using water and caged animals in the affected waters, and up creek or upriver in the unaffected waters on a place that we would call a reference site. And they found that the animals, the caged clams that are held down in the affected waters, suffered from reproductive failures. That is, their reproductive organs gradually shrank, they atrophied at these very low concentrations. Remember I told you PCBs don't dissolve in the water very readily, but even at these low concentrations, either because there was enough in the water or because that which was coming on in the sediment attached to the sediment particles was causing them to be exposed to enough to cause their reproductive systems to fail. And for those of you who are interested, and I'm sure that most of you are not, these are the sorts of things that we were experiencing. That's what they were observing, and it's in the published literature. Well, what's happened over the last few years, and you'll see this goes back to 1971, is that in the 70s, as we began to observe that we're creating problems here, we got to do something, we got to fix these. We banned PCBs, we put in a lot of controls on wastewater systems, on air emissions, on disposal practices. We started finding Superfund sites. We put a fence on them, we put bunkers around others, we started to control them. PCB levels dropped, but not enough. And in some cases, they didn't even drop very much. One of the reasons is that we had places that kept adding PCBs back in, contaminated sites. The other problem is they get into the sediment. And once they get into the sediment, they don't go away. They can get buried, but even if they get buried and you get clean layers of sediment on top, you can get animals that now will live in that clean sediment and start to draw the contaminated sediment up from the lower levels. That process is going on here. And in fact, there are other things that are going on there to keep recycling those PCBs. Even though they've dropped to lower levels, they can continue to be moved around from sediment to water to air, back to water, back to the sediment, through the animals that live there. And that process actually didn't happen very much at higher concentrations. It's much more efficient at lower concentrations. The odd thing with fish that I was referring to before, and I'll have to move this slide next time I give it. This is a very abnormal development. This is blue sac disease, and it occurs in the young fish, just immediate post-hatching. And it causes mortality. They die. They all die. Next slide. So what do we have? We have a Superfund site. We have a large effort to clean it up. And in fact, if you haven't been there, all you have to do is drive by and you can see the mounds of dirt. I think they were probably pretty evident on some of the slides that we saw earlier. And I know maybe a little bit later we'll put that viewer back up so it rolls through them. And they're on the maps in the back. Next slide. We're looking at a long time period for which we've been exposed to PCBs and they've been put out in the environment, which is why there are so many sites. Next, please. And they also co-occur, as I pointed out, with other compounds. Here are our PCBs. Here, this is a survey conducted by the U.S. Geological Survey at 25 different locations up in our neck of the woods, up in the Susquehanna and Potomac River basins, the Chesapeake Bay area. And you see that PCBs occur at a number of different sites that also have the presence of the old banned pesticide chlordane. The related sites have DDT, some of them have mercury, and others have lead. So we have a combination of chemicals. It's not just PCBs, but it occurs with old legacy DDT, chlordane PCBs, lead and mercury. And then there can be other combinations. Next, please. And it occurs, this slide demonstrates some of the things that go on in all streams. This shows not only do we have PCBs, we have chlordane, we have DDTs, we also have at higher concentrations in certain places where you have agriculture with mixed use urban suburban, sort of like here. These are not downstream from a Superfund site. These are in just average streams around the Chesapeake Bay area. The other thing that you see is that the fish have dramatically more than is found in the sediments. I told you that they accumulate, they concentrate in the fish. That's the difference between the purple bars and the green bars. That's the difference between what's found in the stream bed sediments, and what's found in the fish tissues themselves. And the same phenomenon occurs from fish to humans. So don't eat fish. And don't eat the mud either. Next one, please. And then this slide is just another one to show you the range of compounds that are present in these sort of samples, not only in fish tissues but also in sediments, as we go around the site that we've studied.